Welcome back to the lab. Welcome back to EEforEveryone. I've got a really excited video planned for you today. We're kicking off our latest project. Yes, we're going to be kicking off our electronic load project. And, well, we'll probably build and maybe even design more than one of these, but this is the first electronic load that we are ever going to build, and I am very excited. Today I'm going to talk about my vision for the project, some of the features I want this electronic load to have, and we're really just going to lay the framework. We're going to build the architecture that will lead to that electronic load. Man, it's really hard to not say UPS because we've been working on that for so long, but time to take a little deviation to this project. I cannot wait. So let's get this started. Let's dive in. Let's talk about the problem statement. Let's talk about what it is exactly that we're trying to do here. Now, this is a question that I get a lot. This is really something that you guys really seem to want to know is, why would you ever build something when you can buy it? Why are we going to build an electronic load today? Well, that's a great question. And the simple answer is that a good electronic load is pretty expensive. It's an expensive piece of precision equipment. And even a pretty basic electronic load, like if you go on Amazon or any retailer that sells electronics equipment, not that Amazon's one of the best. Anyways. But if you go and you look for how much these cost, they're between $500 and maybe $3,000 for a single channel, pretty basic, pretty low power DC electronic load. And that's a lot of money to spend. That's a lot of money to spend on a piece of equipment. And then you look in the other extreme and it's like the hobbyist, cheap Chinese stuff where they just throw a linear FET on a PCB and just say, whatever. Who needs calibration? And man, they're probably pretty sloppy. Pretty sloppy as far as DC electronic load goes. They're not programmable. They tend to fail in a short circuit. They're really not great. So you've got this really excellent piece of equipment that's super expensive. And then you've got this kind of chintzy, crappy, unreliable piece of equipment that's really cheap. And, well, I want to hit this project right in the middle. I want to make something that's better than the cheap stuff that you can find on Amazon for $50 and something that's, well, probably a little worse than, well, definitely going to be a little worse than what you'd get for $3,000, but I'm hoping that it will really meet our needs. In my opinion, if you're a hobbyist, if you're just doing this in your garage, having a reliable electronic load is worth more than having 0.1% accuracy instead of 1%. It's like, as long as you know what the accuracy of your equipment is, you can always add a DMM, you can always add something else to the system if you need a more precise measurement, but just having a piece of equipment that you can rely on to be a programmable electronic load, I think is very valuable. And that's what we're going to try to do with this project. With that in mind, I do have a few kind of requirements in mind. There's a few things that I'd really like this electronic load to do. I'd like it to have a constant current mode, constant power mode, a constant voltage mode. At the very least, I want it to be programmable where I can do DC load steps. That'd be from a constant current to a different constant current. So I could be 0 to something or something to something else. I also want to have like a pulse, an impulse response mode where it'd be, your off state, whether that be 0 or a small current, and then your on state pulse, which would have some defined pulse width, and then back down to whatever. So impulse responses, step responses, and then arbitrary playback, whether that be, like a point defined source like you can do in LT-Spice, or if that would be streaming data from like a computer. I want this thing to be able to be flexible. I want it to be able to do all sorts of things. So whether that be, so if we're going to have a data stream like that, a little piece of gravy that we might be able to, a little bit of gravy, whatever, a little extra bonus that we might be able to get is if we can get unidirectional data transfer from a computer, perhaps we can get some bidirectional data transfer to the computer, so we can do some data logging, whether that be Coulomb counting, or if you're doing something like a battery system, I don't know, it could be useful someday. And really, if you know the voltage, if you know the current, if you know the power, and you already have communication back to a computer, you basically get it for free. We just need to cross the wires and get the data flowing in the right direction. So that is kind of what I want to do. It sounds pretty fantastic. I would be excited to have an electronic load like that. Hopefully you would too. And yeah, let's do this. Let's keep going. So how are we going to go from this idea? How are we going to get to an electronic load? Well, I've already sketched out a basic architecture for you, and I'd like to walk through that. We're going to walk through the architecture today, and over the next few videos, we're going to kind of fill in the blanks. We're going to make some big, important decisions that set us on the right course. That's going to be component selection, and wrestling with some trade-offs. This is the architecture that we have in mind for the next project. Okay, let's take a look. Some of this looks kind of familiar to where we were talking about where we were planning on going with the previous series. We kind of teed this up for ourselves. So you'll see a couple similar components, just in a more arbitrary way. You see this shunt resistor, that'll look familiar. You'll see the linear FET, that probably looks pretty familiar. We've got some reverse voltage protection that we've added up on the high side, so in case you flip the polarity, it won't just blow up whatever you're connecting. We're going to need some kind of amplifier, some kind of scaling stage, because this could potentially be a high voltage, like almost a dangerous voltage. And, well, we need to make sure that that doesn't get back through the, this monitoring circuit. Because 100 volts applied to an ADC would probably not go very well for the part. So we need something to protect it. Then we've got some other small features. We've got some overcurrent protection. We've got some overvoltage protection. We've got a couple ADCs here. These are for monitoring, so we can monitor the current. We can monitor the current going through the load, going through the electronic load, and we can also monitor the voltage applied at the top of the FET. That voltage, after it's scaled, also leads to an overvoltage protection for the Mosfet. So if we apply too much voltage, it'll limit the current such that the FET won't explode. And if the current gets too high, it should save the FET. At least that's the intent of what we have here. Then we've got our air amplifier that's driven by a digital to analog converter. The compensator that we've been talking about, we're probably going to do PID or a type 2 compensator. And then the critical piece here that makes it, in my opinion, probably a lot safer than those cheap $20 things on Amazon is that we have a digital isolator between what the user touches and the high voltage side. If we're designing this electronic load to handle 100 volts, really anything above 50, I can't design this thing without putting some kind of isolation between the user, me, and that voltage. I need to know that my electronic load isn't going to electrocute me or zap me. Like, that's pretty important. So that's in our architecture. Then, of course, once you're beyond that, everything becomes pretty simple. We've got a microcontroller to select. We're going to plan on using a UART USB bridge from FTDI. They've got great drivers. They're supported on everything under the sun, so it's kind of hard to go wrong there. And for the UI, I think we're going to use like an I2C display. For some reason, I'm really feeling like those 1-inch OLED displays again. They just work really nice, and I think we can make a nice UI that could even give some graphics to show what kind of wave shape you're going to be playing or something of that nature. That's just kind of what I have in mind to help people set the settings right, and then a few buttons that will be a part of that user interface as well. So that's really where we're headed. Pretty simple digital system. We're using SPI through that digital isolator, and then all the analog circuitry is going to live in that high voltage domain. So we don't need to worry so much about getting sensitive analog signals across the isolation barrier. That was something that we tried to do in the previous project just to keep everything consolidated. But in this case, I'm really just not convinced that's going to be the right move. Because we've got the UI, we've got the display, we've got all these types of interfaces that we might want to have on the low voltage side. And with a single SPI interface and a few chip selects, you can control everything you need to on that high voltage side. Plus, SPI ADCs and SPI DACs aren't as expensive as they once were, so I think this might work out just fine. One of the biggest things that I was wrestling with this project was the simple question of how do we want to control it? What type of microcontroller is going to be best for this system? And man, there's a lot in that question. Honestly, I don't know if I really know. On the one hand, we could get a really powerful DSP. We could get something with a floating point unit that's super accurate and does a great job, and it's very accurate analysis of these waveforms. We could. We could also use an 8-bit micro that costs 30 cents. We could do that too. We could land somewhere in the middle, maybe like a 16-bit micro, though. Honestly, I don't know if there's really much room for those because they cost almost as much as a 32-bit, but they're not as full-featured. So, yeah. I'm not sure if simple or advanced is the right play here. But here's what I do know. Flexibility is important, and the first load that we're going to build is probably going to be a prototype, because the first round of any project is a prototype. So if we design this first round with some provisions to play with the microcontroller, I think that would be good. And there's something that I learned in the previous project, in the UPS project. When you're working down in a budget like this, when you're working on things and you're trying to minimize cost to an absolute lowest point, and it's like, okay, for these types of quick turn fabs, it's more than 4 layers is basically off the table unless you want to pay thousands of dollars. Well, in that case, like we learned on the main board, a 4-layer little microcontroller board that gets soldered down onto a 4-layer main board isn't actually a bad idea, because we really didn't need more than 4 layers anywhere else in the design, and that's a pretty relatively cheap way to get 8 layers. So what I'm thinking we're going to do, I'm feeling like the Arduino Pro Mini might be a good form factor. Either the Arduino Pro Mini or the Arduino Micro. I haven't really decided yet. But basically what we're going for is I want a really small micro that we can just dock onto this board to get control. And if it turns out that the 8-bit Atmel part isn't sufficient, if we need a little more juice than that, well, what we can do is we can use that same footprint for the microcontroller daughter board and put like a little PSOC 6 on there, because that little BGA is tiny and it would probably fit in that same form factor. If it doesn't, you know, you can add a little dog bone or whatever, a little T, or change the shape of the PCB but keep the footprint on the board the same. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to go. I think we're going to take a step way back to that UPS Phase 1 design and have a dockable microboard. Not like microboard, but like a microcontroller processing card. So I think that's where we're going to go for the first one at least. Maybe that'll get integrated down the road, but I think this will be really cool. If we start making some Arduino-compatible PSOCs, Arduino-compatible STM32 boards, I know there already are some, right? They've got their dev kits and whatnot, but they're kind of pricey. So I don't know if I want to plan on using them, and they're also very big. They're mostly doing the Arduino Uno footprint, and if that's the size of our microcontroller daughter card, that's kind of huge. So that's what I'm feeling about microcontroller selections. We'll probably start with the 8-bit micro, but we'll build our libraries in an abstract way like we did for the UPS Phase 2, where there's like a couple little pieces of code that you'd actually need to change that actually write to the SPI register or send the SPI write command or read. But then, you know, all the layers of logic on top kind of pass the information down to that lower level function, so that if we need to drastically change the vendor or the architecture, it shouldn't really impact the code too much. That worked really, really well for the UPS Phase 2. And actually the UPS Phase 1 too, the whole UPS project, that worked great. I am floored. We went from like a PSOC 4 to a PSOC 6. We went from a PSOC to Arduino. We did all kinds of crazy things. I think we just took the code and threw it all over the place, and it ran on all different kinds of hardware, and that felt so good. So I want to pull that forward. That worked really well. We're going to do that again. The protective circuits are another thing that I think are really important to talk through. And the reason why is because that's what's missing. The protective circuits are exactly the thing. That's these right here, the overvoltage and overcurrent protection. That is exactly what was missing from that cheap Amazon thing that I destroyed. Basically what it is there's a safe operating area for a Mosfet. We're going to talk about that in our next video, but there's a safe operating area for that Mosfet. And if you violate that, it basically liquefies or vaporizes the actual silicon wafer, the piece of silicon wafer inside of that part, and just, it's gone, it's dead, it's done. But there is an amount of power that you can dissipate for an amount of time where that won't happen, even if the part's already hot. Like, so if there's a short, transient, whatever, and our overcurrent protection can clamp the amplitude of the current spike to a certain level and kind of shut off the MOSFET before it blows itself up, and then slowly turns the current back on, we could ride through a transient where there'd be a hiccup, which isn't ideal. Like, it might screw up a measurement, but it would also ride through a fault and it wouldn't destroy itself and it wouldn't fail as a short circuit. So all things considered, that feels pretty good. Overvoltage protection is likewise, right? There's a power limit, there's a current limit. Both of those are absolute limits. So if we use the voltage limit to make sure we never violate the power or the voltage rating of the part, then we use the current limit to make sure we never violate the power or the current limit of the part, well, there we go. This should be a very reliable system. So those are going to be important parts of our design, very important parts. We're going to need to do kind of a deep dive to make sure that they're going to work as intended. Because, of course, the overcurrent and overvoltage protection, that's the only thing that makes the difference between this design being that $20 Amazon thing that blows up and fails as a short circuit and being that $3,000 piece of equipment that you can depend on. That's probably the most important part of our design. All right, that's all we've got for today. I think we really did a great job of setting this up. We've got an architecture, we've got a problem statement, we've got a plan, we've got an objective. I am so excited to see what this electronic load turns into, and I hope you are too. If you like this video and you can't wait for more, let me know by getting subscribed, hitting that like button, or leaving a comment down below. Coming up soon, we're going to be selecting some critical components for this architecture, and we're going to be talking about driving the high capacitance gates of linear MOSFETs. There's kind of some interesting nuance there that we're going to need to consider. I can't wait. If you want to support the channel, don't forget to check out the links in the description here. There's a link to our Patreon if you want to support us directly, and thank you to all of you who have decided to do so. It really helps us out a lot. Thank you. But most of all, I hope that you learned something great today, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you for watching EE for Everyone, and thank you for staying till the end. Bye!